Okay, we're getting set up. I'll let you know when we're live. Okay, all righty, we're good. And I'm gonna go ahead and record. Okay.
Ready, good to go?
Yep.
All right. Alrighty, I'm gonna start off by sharing my screen. But first off, I just wanted to welcome you guys out here. Super excited to be able to do this with you and to teach you about JavaScript. So to start off, I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna figure out what is this JavaScript, okay? So here, if you just start by Googling JavaScript, you can see all sorts comes up. But for now, we're going to focus here on this right side by what it says. So JavaScript, often abbreviated as JS, is a programming language. And then it goes on and talks more about like some of its features. And you see it first appeared in 1995, so it's been around. And basically what JavaScript does for us is it allows us to make our web pages more interactive. So if you think of all your favorite websites that you go to, whether that's Google itself, whether that's Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, maybe some of your gaming websites, whatever it is, they pretty much all use JavaScript because it makes it so that a web page doesn't just have to be static, meaning it's not just exactly what you see on the page and it never changes, but it's actually able to change as you're using the page. And so I can show what an example of this is right off the bat. So if we go, and I'm also going to drop a link into the chat to a little page I have that has all the links that we'll be using. So I just put it in the chat. And so here it's just, I'll go ahead and open it up too for anyone who's live streaming. But here it's just a link to this lesson right here. It's got an outline of the different things we're talking about. So if you're looking back and you're like, hey, how did he do that? How did he do this? You can refer to this page, and it also will have the code that we're using today. So this is a good resource if you just follow this link up here. And so if you just click on this first link here at the bottom, it takes us to a little demo that I wanted to show you. And so I think you can already see it here. There's a lot. There's a lot of different words popping up on the screen. And so what's happening here is it has a basic web page, but then it's using JavaScript in order to like get the words we're saying and then do something cool with it. So the whole point of this one right here is it's going to change the color of your background to fit whatever you've typed in. So for example, pink or silver, tomato, Dodger blue, wheat. And maybe Shahan, I'm not sure if this will work through Zoom, but can you just say a color? Let's see if it works.
Please repeat.
What was the color?
Color.
Color? Like, can you say blue or green or orange or yellow or something?
Blue, green, orange.
Okay, it doesn't look like it's coming up, so I'll say it for you. Blue, green, orange, yellow, and you can keep going. So here's just a cool example of using JavaScript. And so once again, it just allows us to make our web page more interactive. And if you tuned into us last time, This is a little bit distracting, seeing all my words popping up on the screen. If you tuned into us last time, you saw this whole idea of what we had before, where you had HTML, you had CSS, and then now we're introducing JavaScript. And so here, let's go ahead and let's go back to our page that has all of our resources here so we can check out the place where we're going to be doing our work. So if you just go here to this README file right here and you go down to this live demo, you're going to see all the code that we're going to work on today. Okay. And so here's
Can you
just a
please
little.
send a link of this?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, so check this out. By the way, this is CodePen. It's just an online code editor, and I'll give you more details on what exactly this means in a minute. But just a quick review of some of the things we talked about last time. I'm gonna first just essentially remove all this for now. Just a quick review. So HTML, if we're trying to make a web page, HTML is everything that we want to actually show up on the web page in terms of content. So for instance, if I type in hello world, the classic example, and you hit save or Control S, then you'll notice that those words pop up on the screen. And so that's what I mean by content of a web page, usually referring to the different words on the screen and things of that nature. But then in terms of the styling of our website, that's where CSS comes in. And basically it just means, yeah, conditional, or not conditional, cascading style sheets. But here, if you wanted to, for instance, change the background of this website, we won't go into the details of what exactly this is saying, but it's basically saying here, select everything on the web page and make, or everything here that you can see on the web page and make the background, for instance, orange. And if you hit save, there you see now the background is orange for us. So that's basically what we covered in that first web dev crash course 1.0. And then now here we're going to introduce JavaScript. And JavaScript can allow us to do some cool things. So before we jump into the code with JavaScript, I wanted to show one more thing. And it's why should we learn JavaScript, right? Now we learned over here from this example that you can do really cool things with it, right? You can have different things show up on the web page and you can make it a really fun website. And just to show you how cool it is, if you just search JS popularity, JS meaning JavaScript, you'll see this first hit says there are over 1.8 billion websites in the world and JavaScript is used on 95% of them. The popularity of JavaScript over the years, JavaScript is by far the most used language. So yeah, by that alone, it's used on 95% of websites and it's the most used language. So this is another reason why here with CS Fundamentals, we wanted to teach JavaScript, because if you can learn JavaScript and it's the most used language, you're going to be very, very well off if you go into software development. If you become a programmer, you might be able to get some jobs from this as well. Okay, and so jumping back to the code here, I will just show a simple example. So if anyone here has some experience coding, there's something called print statements usually in coding, which is basically saying like print some text to a little area within our terminal, like within your command prompt, within your PowerShell, whatever you'd want to call it, you can print text to the screen. And so likewise, our browsers have the same feature where we can sort of print things behind the scenes. And I'll show you what I mean here in a sec. So if we say hello, and maybe this time we want to say hello to Shahan, right? So we say hello, Shahan. And if we hit save, you'll notice nothing showed up here in the web page itself. But if you go over here to console and you click that, and now you see, oh, here's hello, Shahan. And we can also change this and say, hello, Will. And if we save it, and then there you see it pops up right there, hello Will. So this is what I'm referring to when I say the console. It's like an extra little dialog box within your browser that you can look at. And it's mainly for the purpose of developers so that they can essentially like learn more about their program as they're making it. And then of course we can also do cool things here with the screen itself. So to show you an example of this, I wanted to first go to Google. So Google's a pretty nice website, right? And here I wanted to show how we could potentially customize a website using JavaScript. So I should probably show what I just did there. If you right click on a web page, I'm just in Chrome, but if you right click and then go down to inspect and you click on that, what that does is it opens up this little sidebar, if you can see that. And so this is called Chrome Dev Tools or Developer Tools. And this is super helpful for developers, once again, to learn about web pages. And as we discussed earlier, this right here, this is HTML. This is what we discussed last time. So it's got, all this content of your web page. You see if I hover over things on this other side, it's showing what that is signifying. Like here, as I hover over this is that little bar going across the screen that has that picture. And then if you go down, oh, here's the little search bar area. And so you can kind of see the different parts of the web page. And then if you look down here, if you can see this part, this is all of our styling. So you see that the body right here has a certain color, a certain font size, all this stuff. So then what I wanted to show you is how we can customize the web page using JavaScript. So if you just hit this double arrows and then go to console, there's some different messages already showing up, but we're just going to hit this right here that has the circle with the line through it that just says clear it out, give me a clean slate, something to work with. And now here we can use JavaScript to do cool things to our web page. So the first thing I wanted to show you is if you look up here, you'll notice how on this little tab within Chrome for this website, it says Google. And that just means the title of the current page that we're on. So using JavaScript, we can actually control this. And so if you just type in document.title, you'll already see that it's returning back Google. I'll make this a little bigger. Google. And so it just went into this little tab and returned back what the title of this web page is. And so we can even change this. If you just do document.title and then you do equals, you can type something else. Like for instance, my website. Just like that. And if you hit enter, you'll notice up here at the top, it no longer says Google. It says my website. And so that's pretty cool. We're kind of customizing a website before our own eyes, making our own Google in a way. And let's say you wanted to do a little bit more. And don't worry too much about like trying to memorize how to type in these different things, how to get the code right, because these are things we can learn over time and we can look up. But just, I want you to see the cool functionality that you can have by using JavaScript. So here we're typing in something called a query selector, which is just saying grab something on this web page. And so here I'm saying grab the body, meaning grab everything on the web page. And then here we can change the style by doing .style, .background. And then we can change the background color. So let's ask Shahan again. Shahan, what's your favorite color?
Please repeat.
Pink?
Red.
Red. Okay, cool. Also, did you have your hand raised? Yeah? Or did you have a question or not? Yeah, did you have a question or not?
It was accidentally raised.
What was that?
I accidentally put the raise button.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay, no worries. Yeah, feel free to just stop me if you ever have any questions. Okay, yeah, so your favorite color is red, right? So we can type in red just like this. And then if you hit enter, whoa, like look at what just happened to Google here. It went crazy, right? So just to review what this did, document.query selector body, all that is saying is basically get the main part of the website that has the background, right? And then from there, you can go style.background to say, I specifically want to go into the styling for this element of the web page. I want to go into the background and then I want to change it to red. And so as you see, here it goes and it totally updated for us. So what I've been showing right here is that JavaScript can run in websites. And in fact, that's the main way or the main reason why we want to use JavaScript is for our websites. But people people have found that JavaScript is so useful that they don't only want to use JavaScript within a website, but sometimes in other places. And so here I wanted to show another example. This is VS Code. It's just a different text editor. And once again, all this code is online on that link that I sent over, the GitHub link. And here, if you just, here, maybe I'll redo this so that we can see this. Let's see. Okay. So if you're in your folder right here, and yeah, feel free to look up tutorials on how to use VS Code if you're curious more. But here, if you're in your file explorer within your computer, whether it's Windows or Mac, you can go to any folder. In my case, I have a code folder. And if you go down to this crash course, I can open it up. And so I can open it with VS Code. And so here it is, it pops up for me. And then now within my files, just within my computer, I can make a new file and I want to put it in this JavaScript folder. And I'm just going to call this one test.js. Now, whenever you use .js, that's basically just telling the computer, hey, this is a JavaScript file. So when I run this file, make sure to run it like you would any JavaScript. And so here, if you remember, we did the thing called console.log, and that makes it show up in that little box at the bottom of our website. You can do the same thing within this. And by the way, this is all using something called Node. And all that means is it lets us use JavaScript in places other than our browser. And so we can just say, hello from Node. And if we hit save, you'll notice nothing happened down here. And that's because, unlike the browser, this one doesn't automatically run, but we have to run the file manually. So to do that, if you just type in Node, and then you say the name of your file, test.js, and hit enter, you'll notice that using Node, this JavaScript package, it was able to find that file and then run that file. And in this case, it just simply printed hello from Node to the console, to this little box here at the bottom. So that's just an example of how we can use JavaScript outside of the browser. So before I continue on, does anyone have any questions about anything we discussed previously about, changing how a browser looks or potentially on Node? Okay, it looks good. Just let me know if you ever have questions. All right, we're gonna go ahead and close out of this. For the rest of our time, we're gonna be using just the website, just the browser, since that is the most common way to use JavaScript. And one more thing I wanted to show you is here, we've kind of customized Google to how we wanted it to be. We were able to change the document title or essentially the name of this tab to say my website. And we were also able to change the background of this web page to be red. But, and this is kind of sad, I hate to break it to you, but if you hit this refresh button, you'll notice it now says Google and it's back to the same color as what it was. So kind of sad, but basically the reason why this happened is JavaScript runs every single time you load a website, okay? And so here by hitting the refresh button, we basically told the website to load again. And so everything that we had typed in here, it was running when we had first had the website going, but then when we hit refresh, all that code was lost and it was gone. So as a general rule of thumb, if you're writing JavaScript, testing it, that's when you might use this little DevTools. Otherwise, what you'd want to do is do what I did earlier using VS Code, or in this case, using CodePen, so that it saves your changes. So now we're going to proceed forward and we're going to talk more about the different features of JavaScript. So the first thing, and this is something that we kind of went over earlier. If you look at this code here, don't focus on this as much, but focus on this right here. You'll notice that this console.log statement is just within like the main line of the program. You know, it's not indented at all. It just runs right down the page, just like that. And so if there's ever code like that, that's just, you know, not indented at all, it's just in that main line of code, it's going to run immediately when you hit save, basically, when you tell that page to refresh. But if you want things to happen, not only when you load a page, we're going to have to do something different. So for instance, here, if I go make this a little bigger, let's say hello world is nice, but it's not very helpful for our purposes. Let's say we wanted to do a little button here and we wanted to make our web page more interactive. Okay, so here's something we can do. If you just, and this goes back to our previous lesson on HTML, but you can use these tags to make a button just like so. And then between these two tags, between the two carets, you can type in what you want your button to say. So maybe your button just says, click me. And if you do Control S or save, then you'll notice that your button now says, click me. But you notice by clicking your button, it's not doing anything meaningful for us. And the reason for that is we haven't told it to do anything meaningful for us. Now, let's say in this example, we wanted to mimic what we did in Google, right? Where we're able to change the background color to red, okay? Now, if you remember from our CSS lesson from last time, you could always go into your CSS part of your files and you could do the same thing, body, and then change the background to red and hit save, and it would work. But let's say you didn't always want your background to be red because, you know, this is going to stay red every single time we refresh the page. Let's say we only wanted it to be red when we click that button. And before we click that button, we want it to be just white. So in this case, CSS is not going to work like that. What we need to do instead is remove that. And then now we need to do something when that button is clicked. Because when it's clicked, that's when we want to change the background color. So here's what we can do. We can use JavaScript within our HTML in a sense. We're going to trigger some JavaScript to run when the button is clicked. And to do that, you just say onClick equals, and then if you just do some quotes, then you can type in the name of a function. And we'll talk more about functions in a minute. I just wanted to show how we can sort of embed JavaScript into our page first. But if you just say change background, we'll say is the name of our function. You just do change background and then you do the parentheses. Parentheses says, hey, this is a function. And you go down to our JavaScript. Now we can go ahead and we can make a function. And it's pretty simple, pretty intuitive. You just say function, and and the name of our function, which we said was change background. And then just do those parentheses again because it is a function. And then if you do curly braces, just like that, and hit enter, any code that you put in these lines right here, this will only be run when that function is run. Or in our case, it will only be run when we click the button. So we said that we wanted to change the background color to red, right? So we're gonna go ahead and just grab the same JavaScript code that we used to change Google's background color. Make sure we change it to red, just like that. And once again, all that's saying is grab the part that has the background, look at the color, and then change it. And if we hit save, now once again, you'll notice the page is still white, and that's because this code doesn't run immediately when you run the page. It only runs when this function runs or when we click the button. So if we go to hello world and then we hit the click me, you'll notice now our web page is red. So once again, we were able to use JavaScript to sort of manipulate how our page looks. And this is really useful because we can make our web pages react to what a user wants out of a program. So you could see maybe a more relevant implementation of this if it was something like click me for dark mode, right? Sometimes websites have that option where you can click something that changes it from the white mode to a dark mode. And so as you would guess, you would just do the same thing, except if you wanted a dark mode, you wouldn't do red. You would do like a dark gray, or just for simplicity, we'll do a black. And if you hit save, boom, there it goes. And we'll go ahead and just refresh the page here so that we can actually see stuff again. Okay. So any questions so far? We're doing good? Okay. Alrighty, now we're gonna go over some more basics of JavaScript, because as of this point, I've mainly shown you how JavaScript is cool and why we care about JavaScript. And then now we're gonna kind of transition to some of the more fundamentals of JavaScript. And by the way, like I mentioned, CodePen is this online interactive code editor. So if instead of just watching me and you want to follow along, you can simply, just go to the link. You can either just copy the link I have here, or if you go here to the repo for this tutorial here, and then you just click on this JS live demo CodePen, it'll open up the same code that we're working on right now, and you can customize it how you want on your end. Alrighty, so let's go over some JavaScript features. And to do this, because I don't really care about saving these changes, I'm going to go ahead and just use Chrome and use the DevTools here, because it'll allow it to be a little bit more interactive for us. And I'll show you what I mean in a second. So first things first, I wanted to talk about variables. And if you've ever heard of a variable before, just know it's a value that can vary. So for example, here, we had the ability to change it to a dark mode, right? And then it might be good to be able to change that back, to non-dark mode. But how are we able to do that? Like, how is the website able to know whether it's in light mode or whether it's in dark mode? And so here's one of those things that variables come into play quite well. Just like with our own brains, we're able to remember if something is light mode or dark mode simply because we remember what it currently is. We can do the same thing with code. So if we go back here, clear the console, and then let's say we wanted to make a variable. So to make a variable, we're just gonna say const, and then maybe we'll just have a variable called isDarkMode. And then we're just gonna say true. And then if you hit enter, you'll notice it went ahead and it did something. And then if we want to see the value of that variable, you can just do is dark mode. And then you'll see that it returned true because we took a variable and then we set it equal to true. So basically, this is keeping track of the whole thing of deciding whether your website should be in light mode or dark mode, is because it will basically use the brain of the computer to figure out that, oh, if it's dark mode, then it's true. And so from there, you have is dark mode is true. And so the screen is dark, right? But you wanted the user to be able to go back to light mode. Behind the scenes, what you can do with JavaScript is say is dark mode and then say equals false. But you're going to notice an error and it says assignment to constant variable. And so this introduces two variable types that we can use. The first type is what we just went over, which is const, which is saying this is a variable that's never going to change. Okay. Whereas if you type in let, that's saying, okay, this is a variable and it can change. So in our case, you know, something like dark mode, we want to be able to change that. So instead of doing is dark mode like that, and then using const, we're going to go ahead and use let. Let's clear it out again and just do let is dark mode equals true. And now, once again, you'll notice that is dark mode is indeed true. Now we can switch it to false. Is dark mode equals false, meaning it is not dark. And you see here, indeed, is dark mode is false. So yeah, this is going over the difference between let and const. And so maybe an example of when you'd want to use const is something like pi, right? I'm not talking pie that you eat, pi, the mathematical pi. And so we know that pi is 3.14 and then all this extra. We'll just say 3.14 and we hit enter. And if we just, you know, print back pi, it says 3.14. And, you know, maybe someone wasn't thinking straight and they thought pi should actually be 2.74. Now it's going to throw an error. And if you type pi again, you'll see it didn't work. It kept pi where it should have been. So this is kind of like a fail-safe that we can do in programming to prevent our computer or users from doing things that they shouldn't do in a program. And so that's why we'd want to use const if a variable never changes. As a general rule of thumb, though, I like to use const unless I know that a variable should change. Then go ahead and use let. So now we're going to go over different variable types, right? And so I've kind of actually gone through a few without telling you, but there's all sorts of different kinds of things that can vary, right? This first one we saw here, it could have values of true and it could have values of false. And so this is what we call a Boolean, which is basically, you can think of it as like an on-off switch. If it's on, it's true. If it's off, it's false, you know? And so maybe if you had another Boolean, you could say, like maybe we wanted to a Boolean for literally a light switch, right? And so you could say lights on is true, meaning that, hey, the lights are on. And then if you came and you left the room, so you flip the switch to off, you could just say lights on is false, meaning that the lights are not on. And if we print that out, you'll see that, yes, indeed, the lights on is not true, meaning the lights are off. So that's a Boolean. It's very helpful if we're sort of toggling between two things on our website. Once again, the example with light mode and dark mode is a great application of that for a website. Another value that we can talk about here is a number. And we also went over that here. You'll notice that pi, here I was able to enter in something, right? 3.14. And so this is, in some other languages, if you're familiar with those, this would be equivalent to a float, which basically means you can have a decimal point that you can store. And JavaScript isn't just limited to decimal points. You know, say it was something like an age. When we talk about our ages, we don't really say 25.3, right? That doesn't really make sense, but we usually just say 25, for instance. And then if you hit enter and then print out what age is, you'll see, yes, that's working correctly. It does print out 25. So yeah, in JavaScript, if we're ever talking about numbers, it's usually whole numbers or it's decimal numbers. And in JavaScript, both of those types are both lumped under number. So let's go over another one. Let's say I wanted to store my name in JavaScript. So if you think about this here, can we use, you know, the two things we've provided to store our name? Not really, right? You know, saying whether true or false doesn't really help us with describing a name, and saying 25 doesn't help us with describing a name. And if you went ahead and you tried to do something like name equals Brigham, you'll notice it's going to say an error. And so basically this introduces the next type, which we're going to describe here, which is a string. And in JavaScript, you can either use single quotes or you can use double quotes. In our case, I'll just use single quotes. And then inside of those single quotes, you can describe what you want your string or basically that word to say. And I'll go ahead and just do my name here, Brigham. And if you hit enter and then you print out name, you'll see that my name does indeed say Brigham. Okay. And I had this as let name, meaning it can change. Whether it should or should not, that's up to you. But let's say I wanted to change my name. And so you can just do same thing as before, just say name equals and then type in a new name and say Dave. And if you run that code and print out what your name value is, you'll see it says Dave. So as a general rule of thumb, regardless of the type of the variable, you can still do these same things where you can set a variable to be equal to something. And then maybe later on, if you wanted to change it, you can just say the name of the variable equals, which is saying change it to something or set it to something, and you can type in the new name. Let's see, let's go over a few more things before we jump into a little activity here. Something I wanted to hit on is there's this notion of objects and arrays, right? So, you know, we had this code before where it's like name is Brigham, okay? And age is, let's say I look really young for my age because I do. So we'll say age is 15, right? Looks like I'm 15. Well, that's good because we have these two separate variables. You know, you can print out name, you can print out age. But you can imagine if you have multiple people you're trying to store here in your JavaScript, that could get really confusing. Because then you try to store another person and you're like, let name, oh wait, I already have a variable called name. Name 2 equals Doug, right? And then you're like, let age, oh wait, I already have an age, let age 2 equal 34, right? And so then it can kind of get a little unwieldy. And then in your head, you're thinking, wait, what is Brigham's age? Is it age or is it age 2? And you can kind of get lost in it. So here comes the notion of objects, where you can sort of bundle multiple variables into one object. And I'll show you what I mean right here. I'm just going to refresh the page and clean this all out. And then if we say, here, I'll make some more space. Let's use the same example for simplicity, okay? We're just gonna have multiple users because that's a common use case in a website to have different users. So the first user, or user 1, is going to have some things relating to it. And to sort of bundle multiple variables into one object, we can use curly braces. Just like this. And then here we can say the name of a variable. So we wanted a name. And so we can say name equals Brigham. And to stick with the example, I guess my age is 15, so we'll say 15. And if you have multiple variables, you'll need to put a comma right here to separate those. And if you hit enter, it looks like it worked, because if we print it back out, you'll see now we have this bundle of variables that if I click the down arrow on, I can see each individual variable. So pretty nice there. And let's say I wanted to make a user2. So we could go about it the same way and, say let user2 equals and use curly braces. But a different way that we can make objects in JavaScript is by doing let user2 and just sort of make the variable, and then we can define attributes or properties about this variable as we go. So let's say in the context of our web page of making a website, we had this sort of registration page. And so when they clicked on a page, let's say we just know, oh, okay, they're going to be making a user. So let's set aside that variable for them. And then let's say they go ahead and fill out their name, and they fill out their age within this little registration thing, and they hit save, and it sends that off. So the way we would save those variables is we could just say user2 dot name equals Tim. This one might have had an error for us. Let's see. Okay. Cannot set properties of undefined. Oh, whoops. So that's actually my bad. It's a good thing we ran through this. When we make that, we have to specify like, hey, this is going to be an object. And so we just have to say equals and then curly braces. So now we should be able to do that. Say user2 dot name equals Tim. Excellent, and it works. And then we can also say user2 dot age equals 55. And if we just type in user2, you'll see there we go. You have user2 and you have user1 right here. So cool. That's essentially objects. And it's super nice because each of these users are going to have similar attributes, but we want to keep them distinct from each other. So objects is a great way to do that. Now to talk about arrays, what we're going to do here is think of an example for arrays. And basically what an array is it means it's a group of different variables. So kind of similar to an object, but also different. And I'll give you an example right here. If you had, let's say, test scores, right? So you could say, let test scores equal, and then to denote an array, we'll use these brackets. And inside of the brackets, we can put test scores. So let's say your first test, you got a 75. Not so good, so we studied harder, and then the next test, it got bumped up to an 83. But then this next test, the material was super hard, and so we bombed the test and got a 61. But then we learned our lessons, studied super hard, and we got a 99. And so we went ahead and we made those variables. And here you can just say test scores. And as you see, it stores a group of these variables with each other, which is super convenient because you can imagine it'd be very hard to keep track of, oh, these are Brigham's test scores, but these over here, those are Sandra's test scores, and the numbers could easily become confused with each other. So it's nice to group these in separate arrays. And just to show you how you could potentially change the values in these arrays, if you say test scores, and then you use a bracket and do 0, what that does is 0 just means the first. It's kind of a weird thing in programming. You'd think a 1 would be the first, but in programming, usually the first item of something is usually 0. So test scores at 0 is how we would read that, is a 75, right? Yep, 75. So if we wanted to change that, let's say we did some test corrections on our first test, we could say test scores at 0 is equal to, and it bumped us up to an 85. And if we print out all of our test scores, you see here, it works just like that. So that's arrays. Oh, and maybe one other thing. Let's say we thought we had all of our tests, but it turns out that there was a surprise final that we had to do. Kind of rude of our teacher to do it, but let's say we had one more test, right? So you can do test scores dot push, and you can push on another item. And because we were surprised that there was a final, we didn't do so well, and we got a 64. And if we do test scores, you'll see now it has essentially been added to the end of this array. And there you go, you can see them all. Just to recap a little bit, we've gone over Booleans, which is just that on-off, true or false. We've gone over numbers, which can be a whole number like your age. It can also be a decimal like pi. And along with that, there's different types of variables. You can have const, which means it doesn't change like pi, or you could have let, which has the ability to change. We've also gone over strings, which is helpful if you're going to type a word and want to save that, like a user's name, for instance. We've gone over objects, which is great for packaging data into one thing that is associated with maybe like one person, like a user. And then test scores, which is great for multiple things, So here, let's actually try to add on to this a little bit more. I want to show you how powerful these JavaScript variables are. So if you remember, I had this variable from before called user1, and then here we just made some test scores. Now let's go ahead and say that we wanted to store these test scores with my user because they are my scores, for instance. You can say user1 dot, and then you can provide the name of the variable you want within your object. We'll just say scores, and then you can say the name of whatever variable, like test scores. And if you hit enter and you reprint out user1, you'll notice here, it's added this essentially to this object, and it says, okay, age is 15, name is Brigham, and here's my scores. So pretty nice right there. And so here we can kind of mix and match, right? We can have objects, we can have numbers, we can have strings, we can have all this kind of intermingled with each other. One more example of this, and then we'll be done, is you can say, let's say we wanted to, how should we do this? Let's say we wanted to combine different users together and then just have one big array with all of our users. If you said let users equal an array, then you can say users dot push, and we just want to add on user1, and you can see users. You click into that array, you can see the first object, which is the one right here. And let's go ahead, and I think we still have that user2, right? Yep. So we can also add that one and do users.push user2. Print out users. And there you see there's two objects in this array. The first one is Brigham, and the second one is Tim. And this is super nice for organization in our code, because if we ever want to do anything with our users in our code, like for instance, if we're having a user log into a page and we wanted to look through all of our potential users and see if we had a user whose name was Tim, we could easily just take this array of objects and sort of loop through them and then figure out, oh, there's Tim. right? And to show you what I mean by that, I brought up looping, but I didn't really explain it. So here's what looping is. Let's say before we try to loop through all of this, we wanted to just loop through different scores that you've had on a test. And we're just going to use test scores, right? So if you wanted to loop through basically touching each of them individually, you can just say for. For just means loop. And then if you just enter the name of a variable like score, for, there should be a parenthesis here, let's score in test scores. What this is doing here is it's saying here within all of my test scores, go ahead and loop through each one individually. So first it's going to hit the 85 and it's going to store the value of 85 here in score, and then 83, and then 61, and then 99, and then 64. And let's say every single time we just wanted to print out what the value is. And so maybe we want to just say your score is, and then just print out the value of your score. Just say something like that, where it just takes your score and then it also adds on the score that you're currently looping on. If you hit enter, you'll see it went ahead and it printed out some values for us. But these values are not correct. Let's see here. Let's figure out why. And here's the beauty of Google, because this is something that happens as developers quite a bit, is we have to look things up. So I'll go ahead and show that to you right now, since it is a big part of being a developer. It looks like I messed something up here with looping through an array. So if we just type in JS for JavaScript and say loop through array of numbers. Stack Overflow, that's a common resource that we'll use. So if you went ahead and clicked on this and you go down to this, you can see there's some different options for us that we can look at and sort of compare. And we'll try to use that JavaScript for in loop, right? Let's see if there's anything we can find about that. Okay, and so here, this is gonna seem a little complicated, but I'll go ahead and break this down for us. Let's see, where were we? Here we were, okay. So if you remember, yeah, there we were. This was the code that we were struggling on, right? Is it was looping through each of the values separately. And we're just going to change score to I, so this is a little bit more apparent. So what this did is it made a variable and it was keeping track of which loop we were currently on. Because if you look back at this up here, it was saying, okay, the first item in this group of numbers was an 85. The second item, or index 1, was 83, and so on and so forth. And so when we look down and we see that it was saying 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, it was basically printing out the value of which item in the order it was, but it wasn't printing out the item itself. And so something we can do instead is, instead of just saying I, we can say test scores at I. So instead of printing out the index or where in the array it was at, it'll say go into the array and print out the value at that index. If we hit enter, boom, there we go. Now it says 85, 83, 61, 99, and 64. So there we go. All right. And before we close out on this whole notion of learning variables, I want to do a little quiz. So obviously, if you're just watching or you're just listening in, just be thinking of the answers on your own here. But clear this out. How this is going to work is I'll give a name of a variable, like I'll say name, and then you have to first intuitively tell me like what kind of variable you think that would be. So as we learned earlier, name should be a string, right? So we'd say string, and then here, think of an example of a name or a string. And so we'll say Billy. And then to verify that our answer was correct, you can actually say something called type of, which just returns back the type of whatever variable. And you'll see here that indeed name was a string. Okay, so that was like the first little test there. So one little test, again, just to make sure you were paying attention, is age. Do we remember what type age was? Let's say, and I'm not gonna say just yet, but let's say age, usually it refers to a certain number, right? So maybe 35. And if you print out the type of the age, you'll see indeed it is a number. That's literally what the variable is called, this number. Okay, so that's the little preview. Got a few more tests for you here. What if there was this sort of variable that could toggle back and forth, and it was called old enough to drive? Okay, old enough to drive, meaning if they are basically 15 or less, it's going to say, nope, you are not old enough to drive, or false, or 16 or older, and it's going to say yes or true, you are old enough to drive. And so we'll say that here Billy is 35, for instance, which is greater than 16, so we'll give him a true. And do we remember what this variable is called? Let's see. Type of old enough to drive, and it's a Boolean. Once again, Boolean is great for switching back and forth between two different options and keeping track of that. Another example here is, what if you had different seasons? And here, this is kind of a 2-in-1 because you have two different things going on here. Let's say you had spring, you had summer, fall, and winter. What types of variables are these? For instance, what is the type of seasons at 0? Meaning, what is the type of spring? And you'll see that these are all strings, right? Because they have those single quotes, just like name, which was also a string. But then what about this whole thing? There's multiple strings in this, but how are they all contained? So type of seasons. And here it says object, but JavaScript, object and arrays, they're all kind of loose, or they're kind of all correlated. Essentially, this is an array. And, just to show another example of objects, if you had something like, let's see. Let's say we wanted to make a dragon, for instance, okay? And we wanted to have color, make it green, and size, just do large, okay? All right, so what type is this dragon as a whole? Type of dragon. There we go. Dragon is an object, and maybe here we're going to practice something we learned earlier. Maybe we'll say fire distance because it can breathe fire, right? And say that it's 125 feet. So if you look at Dragon again, once again, we made a different property. So it's essentially just going to add it to the other properties here within Dragon. So how would we print that out? Or how, I guess the question is, what type of variable is this fire distance, right? So let's look at it. Type of Dragon dot. Dot just means, okay, look at this property within this object, fire distance. And you'll see that it is a number. Okay. So that concludes the little activity there. All right. If you have any questions, just make sure to message us individually, or, take a stab at Googling it. Maybe you'll find some Stack Overflow links and maybe you can figure it out that way. Or reach out to us if you have other questions there about variables. Okay. And so we're getting to the meat of our lesson here. We aren't going to go on for too much longer, maybe about 20 more minutes. But here we're going to go into functions. And then after that, we're going to kind of transition to how we can make our websites more interactive again. Okay. And then at the very end, we'll go ahead and let you code yourself. We'll give you sort of like starter code, and then it'll be up to you to kind of play around with it, change it how you want, and then maybe see how it went. We can kind of go back and forth and see. But yeah, first, functions, right? So here, I'm going to go ahead and go back to this CodePen, just so that we can have this nice visual reference, and it'll save everything that we do easily. So here we have this function, which is just changing the background from earlier. And so this is a function that we've made. But something cool is that JavaScript actually has some functions built in. For instance, this console.log, you'll notice it has some parentheses. And so this is actually a built-in function to JavaScript, meaning like when you type this in, it fires off something else that basically takes whatever you put inside the parentheses and will print it to the screen. So whenever we talk about functions, think of actions. They're all about doing something when you run this function. So we're going to go ahead and show off some more default JavaScript functions. Let's see here. Let's say, instead of just saying hello Will to the console, let's say someone had tried to click on dark mode, but there was an issue. Let's say they weren't signed in, and so it actually didn't change the background color. So here you can just say console.error . And then you can type in the name of an error and say error, user is not logged in. Just like that. Once again, I hit save, but this code hasn't shown up down here in the console yet. And that's because the code wasn't here in like the main line of the code, but here it's indented within a function, meaning that code is only going to run when we run this function. To run the change background function, if you remember, we hit this button. So watch the console and see what happens. Excellent. So we hit click me for dark mode, and here it goes. Instead of printing a normal message, you'll notice the background color is red and it prints out the message we told it to. And so this is a nice feature for developers again. If you're, trying to figure out what is happening behind the scenes in your program, something that you can't see on the page itself, you can print out these little messages. And if you do a console.error, it's going to be really apparent that something went wrong because you're going to see red in the console. So this is another built-in JavaScript function. Another one, and these are some of the main ones that I wanted to hit on today because they're going to go into the little website that we are going to make. Let's say when we click the button, we want to do a little pop-up. Okay. If you just do alert, here's another built-in JavaScript function. It's going to do something cool where it's going to bring up this message. So maybe it's like, warning, you will not be able to change back to light mode. And so if you go here to click me for dark mode and you click it, whoa, look at that. All of a sudden there's this little pop-up within our browser that says, okay, this page here is saying to us, warning, you will not be able to change back to light mode. So this is nice because it sort of tips off the user and says, hey, here's this information that I think you should know about before you proceed onward. And the user can then just hit okay, and things can happen. So let's say we wanted to tip off the user first, and then we want to go ahead and change the color of the background. So that's where this code here is going to come into play. By the way, in case you were curious, this whole thing with the double slashes and how it looks kind of grayed out is something called commenting out, which basically means if you put the double slash in JavaScript before a line of code, that line of code is essentially going to be hidden, such that when the JavaScript is run, it's going to skip right over that code. And then if you want it to actually be seen and actually be run, you just simply delete the 2 lines. And in our case, we want the, well, I'll show you what this does first. Okay, so you'll see that here, it happened so quick that you didn't even notice. But basically this code is saying to switch the background color and then alert, but we want it to alert first, and then we want it to switch the background color. Okay, so let's try that. Once again, alert should pop up and then the background color should change. We click it. Yes, indeed, the alert does pop up with the warning. We hit OK, and boom, there it goes, just like that. And you see we're kind of stuck at this point because once again, it says like, hey, you can't change back to light mode. There's an issue, right? Now, let's see. Another example of something you can do, maybe instead of an alert, something we wanted to do was sort of a confirmation of sorts to make sure that they really did want to change the color. We're going to refresh the page so it's white. And then we're going to say, instead of alert, we'll just comment that out, hide that code and say confirm. This is another built-in JavaScript function. Say confirm. And then we'll say, are you sure you want to change to dark mode? Okay. And then here, you'll see that here it does pop up, right? But now it has 2 options. Instead of saying okay, it also says cancel. And so if they're sure, they basically say, okay, proceed. Otherwise, they'd say cancel. But you'll notice in this case, it's not quite working how we want, because even though we said cancel, hey, we aren't sure we want to switch into dark mode yet, it still changed it. So here, this is kind of tying in some loose ends, because now we can use a variable to store whatever their answer was, and then we can do things accordingly. So we can say const, because their answer is not going to change at this point. And then say, we'll just call it wants dark mode. Meaning like when this pop-up comes up, if they hit OK, set wants dark mode equals to true, because yes, okay, they do want dark mode. They are sure that they want to change to it. Otherwise, if they select cancel, it's going to set wants dark mode equal to false, because they obviously don't want it, because they are not sure they want to change. Then here we can use something called if statements. Whereas, meaning like if you say if wants dark mode is equal to true, then use curly braces, and then we can run some code if that is true. So we want to run this code here. So we're just going to copy it, remove it, and then paste it up here. So once again, I didn't really explain this, but this is saying, okay, look at this variable and then compare it to this. And basically, if these two are equal to each other, if once dark mode is actually true, then this whole thing is going to be true. And then you're going to run this code right here. If once dark mode was false, what it would do is look at that and say, okay, once dark mode is false, and that's not equal to true. So it'll actually skip over this code, jump down here, and that's the end of our function. So it'll be done. So let's test this out. We'll go ahead and refresh the page just to make sure that everything loaded. Click me for dark mode. First test we want to do is if we hit cancel, does it stay white like it should? Hit cancel, excellent. It worked just as advertised because it said this value equal to false, and then this evaluated to false, meaning that it did not change the color. Now on the contrary, if we go ahead and click it, okay, let's go ahead and refresh the page just to make sure there's no issues here. Okay, looks like it's not loading like it should. Just a minute. Sometimes CodePen has this little issue. Just a minute here. Okay, let's see if that did it. Okay, it's having a slight issue for us. Let's see. Yeah, sometimes the alerts and these things, they don't work as well in CodePen. I'll go ahead and just show it in VS Code just so that we can see this. And this is kind of nice too, because this shows you more in depth of how to actually, set up your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You make a new file and you call that index.html. This is your HTML file, similar to this up here. And so here, we're just going to copy that code and go back to my editor, which is VS Code. There's this cool little shortcut that if you just do exclamation point and hit tab, it'll generate like the default HTML. Now all this code is kind of included behind the scenes here in this one, which is why you don't see it. But then we just have to put in all the extra code right here in the body. And so earlier, if you recall, when we were changing the web page, changing the color of Google to something else, and we said document.querySelector body is equal to black, we were basically saying, okay, everything inside of these two body tags, go ahead and change that. So that's what that is doing behind the scenes, is it's looking here at the body. But here, we have this going for us here. There's this little extension that you can just hit go live, and it'll basically open a web page for you. I'm just kind of flying through this because we just want to make a website. We don't want to focus on the configuration right now. We'll make this bigger again. Okay. So here we have our file. and it's not working yet because we only have HTML as of now, and we need JavaScript. So something we can do is add a new file and call it script.js. Once again, the names of these don't really matter, but it's kind of conventional to call your main HTML file index and then call your main JavaScript file script. You can call them whatever though. And then if you go back, we're going to copy that JavaScript code. Just copy all of it. Okay. And we go back to the website. Still not working because when you do it this way, there's one other step you have to do, and that is going here. We're just going to go ahead and put right here. So the head is like little hidden stuff within your page. There are things that don't show up here, but they often show up behind the scenes or maybe here. See how that says document? The little tab that we were using to change Google before. You can define that right here and say my website. Hit save and you'll notice here it says my website. And then here we can also say have a script and then enter the name of the script. And then we're also going to put this thing called defer. So basically this is just saying, hey, when I load this HTML file, what I want to happen too is to load some JavaScript with it. And we want it to load this file, this JavaScript that we just worked on. So let's see if this does the trick. Excellent. Okay, so here it works. And it says, okay, are you sure you want to change to dark mode? Once again, if we hit cancel, it'll just go back, right? Because here it's like, okay, wants dark mode. See that? Once dark mode, if that's false, then it's going to skip over this line and it's not going to run it. But if we click it and we do okay, excellent. Okay, now the screen has changed to black and now we're good. Okay. Now let's go ahead and do, so we've gone over alert, we've gone over confirm, and then I want to show one other thing and then we'll turn you guys loose. So there's something called a prompt. And this just does a pop-up, except instead of putting OK or putting OK or cancel, now it allows you to type something in and then press OK. So you can say enter your name. And we're just gonna comment this out, just hide that code for now. And we save it and reload the page here, then click it. Excellent. So this is a prompt. It shows with the little text area that we can type stuff in. And then let's say the name is equal to John. So we hit OK. And nothing happens quite yet because we didn't tell it to do anything. Okay. So the last little feature I wanted to show you alongside this is we can actually store the information and then do cool things with it. So we could say let name equals prompt. And basically when we type something in here, like John, and we hit OK, behind the scenes, it's storing that value of John right here in this variable. Then we can do something cool with it. So if we go back to our index, you'll notice here with our HTML, we had this hello world and we had this click me for dark mode. Okay. So maybe what we want to do is below this, we'll just do some BR tags, which is just like give me some space basically. If we do a little header tag, it's actually a big one. But here you could type in something like, hey, right? And so it's showing up here. So maybe what we want to do here is we want them to click it, enter their name, and then we want it to say, hey, and then enter in whatever their name is, okay? So I guess first this should say, click me to type in name, just like that. And then here, we're actually going to have to put an ID on this one and say, we'll just say name area. It's just a unique identifier that just says, hey, like if you're ever wanting to know where this is, or you ever want to use this little H1, this element, you can just grab it using name area. And then here in our script, if we go up to the very top, we can start to grab elements. So here commented out was a little example that we won't get to today, but if you just say const, and then you just say the name of a variable. In our case, we're just going to say name area. So similar name, except we're going to use JavaScript, which is just lowercase like that. And then say document.query selector. Once again, query selector is just grabbing elements within your HTML. And then you can just say this little number sign or the pound, which says grab an ID, because this one is an ID. And then you can just take the name of that ID and you can grab it just like that. So all this is doing is it's just grabbing this entire element and storing it here in a variable. Now that we have that, we can do something like name area dot inner HTML. Inner HTML meaning instead of just taking this whole element, only take this part, this hey part. And maybe in our case, we wanted to, do something a little bit more with it. We wanted to change that to say, hey there. And then we'll also just add on a little bit extra to this hey there and say name. So ideally what's going to happen is we'll click it, we'll type in a name like Bobby. And what should happen if this works correctly is it should go over here to our index.html, grab this spot, and then replace the hey with a hey there Bobby, since that's what we typed in. We hit OK. And excellent. There you see, hey there, Bobby went ahead and showed up to our console. Just like that. Maybe one more example here. What's going to happen if we maybe type something in? James. James is our name. But then we decide, I'm not ready to enter my name, hit cancel. There's kind of an issue here, because whatever they typed in, it stored the value as null, which means nothing. The user didn't type in anything because they didn't save it. And so here maybe we could do a little error checking and said if name is equal to, remember it's stored as a null, so you can just say null. Then we can do something else. And maybe we'll just say, we'll just also take that little area that we want to change and say name area.inner HTML. Say, maybe it's kind of more of an error kind of thing where it's like, hey, make sure to enter your name so I can greet you. Exclamation point. If we save that, go back. Once again, we're typing in James and it hit cancel. Still having an issue. Here's another cool thing you can do. You know how I said earlier that the console is really useful when we're developing? If you just, right click, go into inspect, pulls up our developer tools. For our case, oops, let's pull that back up. Okay. Let's go ahead, put this on the bottom so we can see it a little better. Okay. and then we go to our console. So here we can potentially like debug our program, meaning like find out what's wrong with it and say console.log and just do name. So this is going to print whatever it's stored as a value for name. And if we hit save, just ignore that for now and just do the same thing, James, and hit cancel. Let's see what it prints out as. Okay, it prints out as null, right? And so what we want to do is if the name is equal to null, we want to do that. But it seems like there's a little error here with name being null. So maybe we can once again Google this and say JavaScript check if null. Okay, and it looks like we almost had it. Instead of doing 3 equal signs, we'll just do 2. And then we'll save it. Let's see if that did the trick. Refresh the page. And let's try this again. James, hit cancel. Okay. Still having an error. Another thing we can try. Let's see if this works, and then I'll explain it if it does. Refresh. James, cancel. Okay. Still kind of hung up on this one. Just a minute here. Okay. Apologies here. Didn't realize this would be an error that we'd have to go through. Let's look through Stack Overflow a little bit more and see. Okay, maybe we have to also check if the value is undefined. Once again, it just means there's like another issue because we didn't say what it was. Or name undefined. And let's see if that did it. James and hit cancel. And we're still getting it. Okay. Oh, okay. This is actually, yeah, this is my bad. This is something I didn't notice here, but this actually segues in quite well. So what's happening here is it goes ahead and it runs this, and it does find out that name is equal to null. So it goes ahead and it changes what's in this part right here to say, hey, make sure to enter your name so I can greet you. But then it just keeps on running through the code and then says name inner.html is hey there, and then it prints out the value. So even though it was correctly going into this if, it was immediately getting overwritten by this. And so that's why pretty much regardless what happened, it kept doing this. Because if this was true, it would run that and then just overwrite it. And if it was false, it would just skip over that and print this out. So maybe what we want to do instead is have an else statement and then take this right here and we'll move it up. Okay. And I'll go ahead and explain that if this can work properly. We do James. Let's first try out if it works properly. Okay. You'll notice it says, hey there, James. Refresh the page. Click me to type the name. Now we'll do James and we'll hit cancel. Excellent. Okay, now the error shows up correctly and it says, hey, make sure to enter your name so I can greet you. So this is what the else is saying, is it says, okay, if I do this check and like what just happened, if they cancel out and the name is not equal to anything, then go ahead and change this little element to say, hey, make sure to enter your name. Otherwise, meaning like, hey, name is actually equal to something, it's not null or undefined, then Otherwise, else, go ahead and run this code. And if we just do it again, Bob, hey there, Bob, it goes ahead and it runs that code. So there you go. There you go. Using JavaScript, it took us a little bit here, even for someone who had more experience, but that's the nature of web development, and it's so fun. We were able to use functions and use variables, then use JavaScript's built-in functions like alert, prompt, and confirm to have a more interactive experience with a user. And so the last thing before we head out here is I want to turn you loose, give you some time, and then just run with this. Run with an example that I have for you. So going back to the GitHub page, you go to this CodePen called JS Popup, create a hero. We'll go ahead and open that up. Here I have an example code for you. Okay. And so here it's got some HTML, got a little bit of CSS, mainly for just, some minor styling and stuff. Don't worry about that for now. Just worry about your HTML and your JS. But basically, I'll show you what it does first. So the whole point of this is it's going to use pop-ups so that the user can interact with this web page and enter information so that they can then create a hero. It's sort of like an RPG. It's a role-playing game, kind of like Zelda, maybe like Pokemon, something like that. So here, welcome gamer, let's create a hero. And then if you hit see instructions, uh-oh. Yeah, CodePen's having some issues. So maybe this will work on your end. Let me try one more thing because I really do want to get CodePen working. Okay. Yeah, sometimes CodePen just has some weird issues when it comes to like doing alerts and some of this built-in JavaScript stuff. I think it'll work on your end, so go ahead and give it a try. Otherwise, you might have to do what I'm doing here. But in my case, I'm just going to copy all the code over to my text editor here and paste it in the body. Okay. So that looks good. And then we're going to do the same thing. Yeah, let's add in some CSS. I'll do this really quick. I won't really explain this one because it's beside the point. Basically, you just make a separate file called styles.css, and then you can provide a link to it. It should hook up. Okay. And then the JavaScript we need to paste in as well. Yeah, apologies again about this. CodePen is usually pretty nice, but when it comes to those built-in JavaScript functions, it can have some issues. Here we're just going to comment this out because this code was kind of nice. Maybe we'll paste it over here. Let's see. Let's get this going. Paste it down below. Okay, cool. And then we'll just copy this code back over here so you guys have it. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and see if this is still working. Go ahead and move this over. Okay. Let's size this down a little bit. Okay. Excellent. So see instructions. This is what should have happened in CodePen, but it's going to happen a little bit easier if we're just using our own text editor instead. But you click on it and it does this pop-up. So a little quiz, think to yourself, what kind of pop-up is this? Is this an alert? Is this a prompt? Or is this a confirm? And the answer is this one's an alert because it displays the message and it just says, okay, meaning the user is not supposed to do anything with it other than make sure that they've seen the message. And here it just explains how this game works. You click on each button, respond accordingly, and we'll make a character based on your answers. Okay, that makes sense. Now here's the next one. Your name is. You click on it, and then now it has this pop-up. Now, which kind of pop-up is this? If you thought it was prompt, you would be correct, because here it provides a little text area that we can enter something in, like Taylor. And if we hit OK, it saves it, and you'll see there it says, yep, your name is Taylor. So sweet. And then if we go ahead and we say your weapon is, once again, this is another prompt. We'll just say my weapon is a sword. Okay. So now you've kind of gone through the customization process, provided a name and a weapon, and you can hit create my hero. And now here is another pop-up. It says, are you ready to create your hero with the current customizations? And what kind of pop-up is this? It has an OK and it has a cancel. So this is actually the confirm, right? So that here we can basically check between yes or no, true or false, to see if the user wants to do something. And if you hit cancel, nothing happens, as it should, because they are not yet ready. But if you hit create my hero and hit OK, you'll notice down below, now it basically shows you what is this hero that you've made. Name is equal to Taylor, and weapon is sword. Just like that. And here's all the code. I won't go into a ton of depth about it, but I'll just kind of walk you through it so you can understand it more. Here with this create a hero in the HTML, it makes this little header, and then it says, okay, here's a button, see instructions. And when I click on that, run this see instructions button. And then as for these other ones, it has some text that says your name is, has a little area that you can enter in the name of the variable once they type it in. And then as far as picking the name, they click on the button, it runs the pick name function. Same thing with the weapons, except customized to a weapon. And then on create hero, you're able to click that and it'll run the create hero function. And then as far as output goes, it'll print it right here in this header tag called hero output. And over in our script, we grab the different elements we care about, meaning like, hey, we care about this area right here because we have to put a name there. We care about this area right here because this has to change to be whatever their weapon is, in this case, a sword. And then the last thing is the hero output. We care about this area right here. We need to grab it so that we can change what their created hero looks like. Then here, we go ahead and we make a hero object. Once again, an object just stores different properties of stuff. And then at that point, we can go ahead and run all these different functions depending on what they click. Meaning, if they click on see instructions, it's going to run this code. And once again, we went over this before, but it's just a simple alert that just prints out how it works. It's pretty simple there, not too much going on. This next one is pick name. And if you click on it, then it's going to prompt the user for a name. And then it's going to store the value of whatever the user name is, just as a little string, a string within this object. So just so you know what I'm talking about here, it would basically say that hero is now equal to name and then Taylor is basically what it's doing behind the scenes. And then here it's also saying, okay, and by the way, we grabbed this little area make sure to update that to be whatever the name is. Same thing with weapon. It goes ahead and says, okay, weapon is equal to sword. So store that inside my hero object, just like that. And then go ahead and also update this little area so it reflects what you typed in. And then the last thing it does here with the create hero, it does some error checking like we struggled with earlier. And then it'll print an error if they didn't provide the name for Taylor or a sword. So I'll show you that right here. If you just try to immediately create your hero, it pops up with the error. And then once you provide a name and a weapon, and then hit create and say, okay, then it goes ahead and it skips past this little error checking. And then it goes ahead, it confirms if you're ready. If you are not ready, it just returns. Get out of this function, they are not ready. But if they are ready, it's going to continue on and it's going to go ahead and put name is equal to the name and the weapon. So there we go right there. Anyway, for anyone who's watching live or for anyone who's watching after the fact, once again, if you have any questions regarding this example, go ahead and either Google them or reach out to us and we're happy to help you out. And normally if there were people who are on here live, I would go ahead and cut you loose, give you the CodePen link, just like this, and then you would have the ability to kind of tweak this how you'd want and make your own role-playing game. So anyway, this is concluding this WebDev 2.0 JavaScript tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it. Just as a little conclusion here, we've gone over what JavaScript is, why it's important, because it's widely popular. It's used in all sorts of browsers, 95% of websites. You can run it on your browser. You can run it on just your local machine. You can run it in CodePen. You can run it in VS Code. It's almost everywhere that you can. And as far as coding, you'll see JavaScript everywhere. And we can set it up multiple ways. There's all sorts of functionality. You can make variables. You can make functions. You can use functions that JavaScript has prepared for you. You can use JavaScript to change how the styling of a website looks, like with changing the background color. You can change the title of a website. It really goes on and on. Like, if we can just take what we've learned today and then build off that foundation, we can do truly remarkable things, like we saw with this little example here, where it uses JavaScript to do cool predictions and things of that nature. Anyway, there you go. There's been JavaScript 2.0 in 2 hours, and hopefully you enjoyed it, and reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Brigham. That was great. And for anyone watching live or watching us on YouTube after the fact, next weekend, Sunday, October 3rd at 10 a.m. will be Sean with an intro to game development using Unity. So check that out, sign up, it's free, just like all of the courses. And hope to see y'all there.